proudly presents the Horror Day Podcast.
What is going on, everybody? This is Jimmy, and this is episode 186 of the Horrific Podcast. Today we have a special guest from overseas. Filmmaker James Quinn is in the house, or via phone. He's in the house on the show, and we are talking his newest horror short, the first horror short ever to be filmed in a 1:43 aspect ratio on IMAX film. He gets into the details of just how hard that could be as we are winding down to getting closer and closer to Sinister Creature Con. So he is really our last filmmaker guest until Sinister Creature Con. And it was a very cool talk, man. Had to get up super early my time to talk to him. Definitely worth it. In other news, I have been house sitting for my parents, and usually, why does that matter? You may be asking yourself, and it's a fair question, but their internet is so bad. All that is really left to do to pass the time, besides hanging out with their dogs, is watch movies. And one of the movies that I watched, and the review's already been posted on our site, is Perfection. And Perfection, or The Perfection, is a cool film from Netflix. And last week, if you remember, I was talking about Chambers, the show that Netflix had put out about the heart transplant. And I really kind of hammered on Netflix and talked about how I thought that they didn't really know how to end a show. And I think that The Perfection swayed me a little bit on that. But here's the thing. The Perfection is a movie. It's 90 minutes long. The Chambers is a 10-hour ordeal. So Netflix, so far in my mind, still, batting average wise, doesn't necessarily know how to end a show, or in some cases, a film that well. They build. They do not deliver in the end. Not the case in The Perfection. The Perfection kept me guessing the entire time. I thought I had figured it out, and they would throw another swerve. The first swerve that comes, and I'm trying hard not to do spoilers because this film just came out on Friday. Netflix released it, and it's Sunday as of this recording. Netflix really, they try to swerve you, and they set it up in a typical horror film way. But then some of the swerves that they use to kind of keep you on your toes are so out of left field that it really is hard to figure out the entire story. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And it makes the viewer, or in this case myself, way more intrigued as to the goings on. So I give it a I think I gave it an 8 out of 10 on the review. And I'll stay by that. it's not a head and shoulders just like amazing story in any regard. Cinematically, it's pretty straightforward. It's not really groundbreaking, but the story in itself is really well done, and for that reason, I gave it an 8 out of 10, maybe a 7.5. The more that I think about it, it may go down to like a 7. But first initial reaction, I gave it an 8. It's not a kind of horror film that would be featured on like Campfire Chronicles or anything like that, but it's a solid movie. Coming up this week, I believe we will start really prepping for Sinister Creature Con, and next week the guest that you will hear with 2 weeks away is myself, co-host of Campfire Chronicles and panel host Abby, and the other panel host Jay, and we have a discussion about getting excited for Sinister Creature Con. That'll be next week. But right now, like I said, James Quinn, director of Daughter of Dismay, I have high expectations for the film. If you look up Daughter of Dismay on Facebook, you can see stills that he has done. You can also see stills, I believe, of what inspired the film to begin with, and he talks about that photo shoot in this interview. And I mean, it looks really cool. He talks about the task at hand of shooting at a 50 ISO, which is just stupid challenging to have to light that when you're shooting that low of an ISO. I can't imagine that. And he pulled it off. And not a whole lot of people may understand what that is that listen to this show, but let me tell you what, man, that is not an easy task. That is not something that needs to just be brushed off, because that's crazy. And I'm very excited to see the end result of this film. But I've babbled on long enough. It's early as of my recording, so I will put on James's interview here, and I hope that you enjoy it. Joining us on the podcast right now is horror director James Quinn, and his forthcoming horror short is the only, to my knowledge, to be filmed on 70 millimeter film and the IMAX 1:43:1 aspect ratio. The short is called Daughter of Dismay. Super excited to check it out. Looks really, really cool. James, how you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. We just pretty much finished production, and I've been working on this for over 8 years, so I'm feeling amazing.
Yeah, I mean, as you should, man. This looks like a heck of an undertaking. Being a senior in film school myself, this accolade that you have done and filming it in that ratio on film itself, I mean, that sounds like a hell of a challenge. What made you decide to take this route?
I knew it was going to be pretty much impossible to actually pull this off, but the entire thought behind this was I've been making horror shorts, and especially very artsy shorts, basically art house horror films for a while. And after a while, I realized that even the people. One of the things I always took the most care of was cinematography, because came from an art house background, so I always was trying to make things look very visually imposing. And I realized after a while that even people who couldn't really get into the art house and into the more experimental aspects of my films, even those people usually were really impressed by the visuals. And I realized the power of just really carefully composing something and just pre-planning every single detail in a shot. And I do really enjoy classic art house cinema, but I'm also a fan of big epic Hollywood cinema, like pretty much anything that has been shot in 70 millimeter, I'm a fan of. And I thought it would be really interesting to sort of combine the elements of big Hollywood cinema and the surreal and obscure and more slow aspects of art house cinema, especially the cinematography. So yeah, at first we were actually planning on shooting this in a 35 millimeter, but I got the opportunity to. I got in touch with the cinematographer, who's absolutely amazing, and we talked a little bit, and we figured out a way to actually shoot this in 70, and we weren't sure if we were going to be able to pull it off first, because obviously you need an insane budget for this kind of stuff, but we were able to find a private investor who funded the entire thing, and yeah, at first we pretty much progressed from 35 millimeter to 70, and then my cinematographer called me 2 weeks before the shoot, and he told me he just got an email from an IMAX filmmaker, and he said he would rent us his IMAX camera, and we knew that it was going to be a lot more expensive than a regular 70 just because it uses so much film, but after just it was an absolutely furious process, but we actually managed to make it work. And I guess the whole thought behind this was I wanted to create something that still has the qualities of an art house film, but that's accessible for for a larger audience, just because it's this big epic experience that pretty much anyone could get into while still holding on to the surreal and the dark and the occult. So yeah, it was a very interesting challenge combining these things, especially since you have to work a lot differently with this format on set and in pre-production. But that was pretty much the thought behind it, just combining these two elements that no one's actually really combined, just because I mean, now IMAX is starting to come up with horror films too. I think The Curse of La Llorona was screened in IMAX, but it wasn't 70 millimeter. Those are all digital.
Right.
Those are all digital movies. So this was actually the first 70 millimeter IMAX horror film too, which is awesome because it's a very immersive format, and it just pulls you into the experience unlike anything else. And I was really interested in combining those elements.
It's funny because we just saw La Llorona on IMAX, and it was kind of almost a surreal experience to see a horror film in IMAX. But as you just said, digital production there, and that is kind of the industry is where it's at, especially for budget. Independent films that are working with a budget. It's way easier for the filmmakers to get their work, shot and edited digitally, where you guys went the route of doing it on actual film stock. That just in the long run is kind of really cool, just for the sake of that you're doing it, the original way. I think any filmmaker, to be able to film on film at least once, it's got to be a cool experience to be able to do that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm an absolute celluloid fanatic, and I've been shooting film exclusively for the past years. But I've been mostly shooting 16 millimeter and a little bit of 35. But I've been shooting a lot of 16 millimeter. I mean, that's what I started out with, and I still love the format. I love the organic, grainy grittiness that gives you. And I mean, we're at a point now where even 16 millimeter, especially Super 16, which is a little wider, is getting so advanced. I mean, if you look at some of the films that were shot in 16 millimeter recently, you can barely even see it. It still has the quality of film, but it's getting so clean because celluloid analog film is so advanced by now. I mean, yeah, Mother was shot in 16 millimeter, and it still had a very clean look. So it's really amazing, actually, how far film has progressed. But I'm obviously shooting in something like 70 millimeter IMAX is a completely different thing, and it was a very inspiring experience, and it was very intimidating, but it was definitely something else getting to shoot in this format. It's scary actually, just because every second you're standing on set and the camera's running, it's just so much money running through the camera literally every second.
Yeah.
So you cannot afford to mess things up. So you have to cut down on the shooting ratio a lot. So what we did was we had like 3 minutes of shooting for every scene and 2 hours of preparation where we just rehearsed all the time. Just so we would get as close to the perfect take as possible in the very first one. Mostly we did shoot a few scenes a couple more times just because we needed to, but it was that's a very to a certain point it was actually very sobering, just because you get focused so much on just getting the perfect take. Because I mean, in digital, if you shoot digital, a lot of times people will just shoot the rehearsals too and see if something turns out. And it's more a thing. It's more of a chance thing than of actually just getting the perfect take and just as quickly as possible. Because if you're forced to rehearse that much and to just really get the perfect take as soon as possible, it just changes the way people work on set too. And it's very fascinating. I actually liked working that way, even though it was a little scary, because obviously if you do mess up, it's going to be more expensive, and not just a little, but a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things about shooting in this format that I really enjoyed, just because it forces you to focus to a degree that's almost painful, but it just makes it better. It just it gives you results that you wouldn't usually get. Just because it was very, very fascinating working like this, and also just seeing everyone else on set just be this focused. I've never actually seen that before on a set, where everyone was just absolutely not on edge, but almost it was very tense, but in a very positive way, just because it led to great results, and we usually didn't have to do more than 2 takes, just because we were rehearsing for 2 hours.
What was it that you drew from for Daughter of Dismay? Talk about, share what you want without any spoilers about what the film is about, and where did you kind of get the inspiration for this story? Because it is a very very cool sounding story. It's not a horror film that has been done to death at all. When I was reading on the page and the synopsis, plot lines and stuff, it's something that I haven't seen before. So where did you kind of draw your inspiration from?
Oh, basically, it's actually really interesting how this started out, because how this entire thing initially started out was that was 1.5 years ago. I did a photo shoot with a friend, and it was sort of a witchy occult thing. It was we shot it in black and white 35 millimeter. It was all stills, and we used a lot of really spooky props that were actually used in the final film too. And there was no story or anything. It was more like a concept shot where I wanted to just capture this witch, and she did such an amazing fucking job that I was absolutely fascinated by this, and my brain immediately started developing a story for it. I just looked through the pictures once I developed and edited them, and it was just this clear story for me there. It was interesting because it didn't. I wasn't intending on making this at first, but just seeing those photos inspired me so much. Just because she had a really amazing way of portraying pain and emotion just through her facial expressions, and you could really see that this character in the photos was really troubled. and it was sort of this broken witch. And I actually really liked the idea of a witch being portrayed not as this satanic, evil entity, but as sort of a broken human being that just sort of lives in this occult world. Because obviously the history of witchcraft is very sad, actually. And I was very intrigued by actually telling a story after seeing these photos. So I literally wrote a script in 2 hours just because I had the entire story made up in my mind, and I reworked it a little because you can't write any script in 2 hours.
Yeah.
So I worked it a little, but and then I approached her and asked her. I sent her the script and asked her if she wanted to be in a movie. And she's never acted in anything else before. And she said yes, and that's how the entire thing just sort of started out. And yeah, the whole idea was to show a kind of witch that's not usually portrayed in the media, which is sort of a broken but very powerful woman that tries to get something back that she lost that was very dear to her, and she goes through very extreme measures to get this back. I'm not gonna say what it is. I don't want to give too much away, but in a way it's a very packed short, just because there's technically so much that would happen in between the scenes, which is actually why we're going to make this into a feature, which I'm developing right now. That's going to be interesting. We're going to stick to the whole 70 millimeter thing. Not sure if we're going to do IMAX, but we're definitely going to do 70 millimeter. But this whole thing just basically went from a small photo shoot to a gigantic short film, and now we're going to make it into a feature. So that was really interesting. Since it just happened, sort of.
It's interesting how that does happen, where you have a concept, and when you finally dive in and try to explore it, how it kind of blossoms into, other stories, or in your case, a short into a feature when you have that character. I know, with us, our low budget feature that we did a couple years ago, our main antagonist has since we're doing a short that kind of tells his origin story. And when you create a character out of your own mind, it's kind of a trip to see the world develop itself for you. And so I can totally relate to what you're saying.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, it's actually very fascinating how things like these can just develop without you actually actively. It's interesting how your brain just sort of adapts to this world and just sort of makes things up on the way. Mm-hmm. It's very very fascinating. That's one of the beautiful things. That's one of the most beautiful things to me about just immersing yourself into a world that you're writing. Just because at some point you just start living in it, and things just start making sense by themselves. And that's exactly how I feel with the feature script currently. Just because it's I know exactly what's going to happen in this. It's very interesting. So yeah, that's definitely very fascinating how these worlds just unfold in your own brain.
What film was it? Because everybody who comes on our show, and horror fans in general, I would assume, always have like one or maybe two movies that when they first got exposed to the genre, hooked them into the genre, and whether that be a subgenre of horror or just horror in general. What was it for you that got you into it?
It's an interesting question because I've thought about that a lot, and it's really hard for me to make up my mind because I started watching horror extremely early on. I started watching horror when I was like 12 or 13, I don't remember what the first movie was that really. I think one of the first movies I remember that I watched that made me want to make a movie immediately was David Lynch's Inland Empire. Because to me that was just the absolute epitome of a nightmare, just a nightmare on film, and it's not a classic horror movie. Obviously, it's an art house experimental film, but that movie just stuck out to me just because of the way it tried to terrify people, and that was true horror to me, just because you started. It was such a dissociative experience. That just made me want to pick up a camera and just shoot stuff. A lot of Lynch films, obviously, just because it came out of the whole surrealism, the whole surreal aspect about movies really fascinated me. I'm not 100% sure about classic horror. Weirdly enough, I started out art house heavy things, and it sort of progressed into regular horror. Some of the things that absolutely inspired me the most are actually silent films, like the original Nosferatu.
Yeah.
Just simply because they had a way of visualizing things back then that it hasn't existed ever since. Simply because it's interesting to me with how simply they pulled it off while still having everything look basically like paintings, because all of these shots were so extremely thought through and so well crafted. And I remember, also Murnau's films like Faust, and all these beautifully crafted silent films just inspired me so much. I'm completely obsessed over some of these films. I actually have tons of 16mm prints of all of these. Those inspired me to very, very. I was just very fascinated by the way they framed things, because it was very different from how you would do it now. A lot of those shots were just still shots. And there wasn't a lot of movement, which is interesting, because that's something I don't really do. Daughter of Dismay has a lot of movement. The camera's pretty much gliding through the air at every point, but still the silent film era inspired me very much, just by the way they use very simple techniques to make something look very, very visually imposing. I guess Nosferatu is definitely a film that made me just want to make something too. But yeah, technically, I think Inland Empire is like the first movie that made me want to make horror films. It's sort of hard thinking back, just because I've seen so many films by now, because I used to just watch films obsessively and just watch movies so much. I don't even remember some of the things I watched. But one of the things that inspired Daughter of Dismay the most were actually Russian movies, Russian art house movies, specifically Tarkovsky, and his film The Mirror and Andrei Rublev. Just because he has a way of framing. I mean, he was a big inspiration for a lot of filmmakers. Like Lars von Trier always dedicates his films to him. He has a way of pulling movement into the frame that's very interesting, simply because the camera is moving at pretty much all times, and it's sort of gliding through the scenery and sort of gliding through every single shot. And there's something very poetic to me about just slow movement in cinema, which is what we were trying to do with Daughter of Dismay. So the camera is pretty much moving all the time, which was very interesting. It was also a pain in the ass to pull off, because IMAX cameras, they're 150 pounds, and they're like a tiny motorcycle basically. So we had so many setups, because we were doing dolly shots all the time. But it was really interesting, because it just gives you this effect of just like being pulled into the world just through these slow moving dolly shots, and it's a very brooding in a way. That was very interesting. So yeah, it was funny, because I sort of combined all these elements of these films that used to inspire me back when it started out, and I made it into sort of my own thing.
It's interesting because that was going to be my next question that you're saying with the constant moving. You guys are out in the middle of woodlands. It looks like. How was setting up those dolly tracks? I would imagine for each shot you got to take it apart and put it back together again. That had to be a daunting task for you and your crew.
Yeah, I mean, it was insanity. I remember we got 2 weeks, but we actually started preparing 2 weeks before the shoot. Our cinematographer came over from Denmark 2 weeks prior to the start of the shoot, and we went out into the woods every single day and just sort of planned everything through. And I remember a week before the shoot, our gaffer, who did and our grip team, who was responsible for all the lighting at the dollies. He came over and I showed him the set and everything, and I just remember him standing there with his hand on his head. He was like, "Holy fucking shit! I have no idea how we're going to do this." Because it was in the middle of the woods, and we literally had 2 tons of cables that we had to pull through the woods because it was so deep in. And we had an entire truck that served as a generator. And all the dollies, we had to cut a way into the woods to actually manage to get everything in, which took an entire day by itself.
Oh, man.
And the dolly obviously had to be taken apart every single time and put back on, and we had a lot of different. Luckily, all of the shots were filmed very close to each other, so we didn't have to move very far. But it was still it took forever to set each shot up, just because obviously, not only do you have to move the dolly, but you have to build the tracks again, and you have to take them apart and rebuild them, and you also have to. It's also really intimidating moving the camera, just because you have to have 2 people carry it around. So yeah, that was insane. That was absolute insanity. We had to figure out a way for the lighting situation too, because we were shooting on extremely low ISO film. At an ISO of 50, which is nothing, and it was basically dark in the woods. So we had to artificially create sunlight in a scenario where it was basically dark. So we had to have gigantic lights that were basically the size of cars, and we had to get those into. And we had to. That was intimidating too, because those things are so hot that they can literally set the entire forest on fire. So we had to be really careful for it not to get close to trees or leaves or branches. So yeah, the technical aspect of this, and just the physical aspect was absolutely insane. We had like 8 production assistants just because we needed to move so many things.
That ISO setting at 50 sounds so painful, and a lot of people listening to this may not know what you're talking about, but essentially the ISO setting is how much light is coming through the lens, and a typical like DSLR or digital camera, you're looking at 16 to 3200. And so,
yeah.
And you are shooting at an ISO of 50, which basically is like shooting in a pitch black room, camera wise. So the amount of work that you guys had to put in to light this, so your actors show up and the set around your actors shows up. That. Yeah, God, I feel the pain for you, man.
That was part of my own perfectionism, just because I wanted this film because what we were doing essentially is we're doing direct photochemical prints, which means there's no digital step in between. It's going directly from the original camera negative to the final film prints, which means it's going to be extremely sharp and crisp, but the colors are going to be absolutely beautiful. But also, obviously, the higher the ISO, the grainier it is, and the less sharp it gets. The ISO 50 film is the the most crisp and beautiful motion picture film there is, just because it has a sharpness and a detail that's absolutely, you cannot get this anyhow else. So I went through the pain of actually shooting at an ISO 50 just because I wanted to have that quality. I wanted it to be this absolutely incredibly sharp image. Also, one of the cool things about shooting at that low of an ISO is that you can leave the aperture of the lens completely open. So you can, which means you're going to have an incredible depth of field. And at a 70 millimeter film in general has an absolute insane depth of field because it's so large. So there are scenes in the movie where the depth of field is literally, it's focusing from one point of the forest to another, and it's sort of literally pulling you through the entire forest just because you can see the focus shift so intensely. And that was an effect that was really interesting and that I really loved, that I wanted to achieve. Obviously, it's cool because you can, with 70 millimeter film, you can achieve the exact opposite too. If you're doing landscape shots and you turn the aperture down all the way, you get the steep focus with every single detail in the image, no matter how close or how far it is away, being in focus, which we used for landscape shots, which you can see in the opening. So yeah, that was really interesting experimenting with that. But yeah, obviously shooting at an ISO 50 was we weren't even sure if we were going to be able to do it, and the lighting, for that very reason, the lighting of the film alone made up a pretty big fraction of the budget, just because we needed so many lights, and they had to be really gigantic too. So yeah, we had like 4 18K lights. I'm not sure if that tells you something, but those are absolutely, those are basically as big as a tiny car. And they were actually so bright and hot that I got sunburned from them.
Oh my god. You being in Austria, and you mentioned Denmark and stuff. In the States here, the folklore, when you say witches, I would wager the majority of people think of Salem witch trial. And that's, they may not know a whole lot about the lineage of witches or the practice of witchcraft, but everybody knows Salem witch trial. Over there, is there a following, or is the lore of witchcraft popular?
Oh, I mean, Germany was pretty much the center of the whole witch trials, and Germany had an absolute. There's so much rich history about witchcraft in Germany. I mean, one of the most famous places of witchcraft is in Germany, which is the Mount Brocken, which is very much connected to a lot of Satanism too. It's very interesting, actually. There is a lot of history of witchcraft, and more so in Germany than in Austria. But Austria has just as much history, and it's very interesting. A lot of the mountain areas have a lot of memorials too. There are statues and memorial places that they're specifically about witchcraft, and there are actually a lot of those, which is very interesting. So yeah, there is a lot of very rich history here in terms of witchcraft and witch trials. I mean, Germany back then was very intense. There was a lot of fucked up shit going on. Yeah. But they're very interesting. I can't even tell you specific details simply because there's so much. Mm-hmm. I really suggest you look it up because it's extremely interesting, and especially Mount Brocken, which is a very famous mountain.
Right on. The film itself, you guys just wrapped shooting, so now you're going into post-production. When are you ideally hoping to premiere?
Well, we are basically finished with post production now.
Oh,
so
wow.
what the next step is going to be the production of the film prints,
Mhm.
which is where it looks like we're doing the color timing, which is basically the analog version of color grading. It looks we're doing the color timing in June, beginning of June, and we should ideally have the final prints a month later, something like that. We're still finalizing those details. We're talking to Photochem right now, which we're doing the film prints. We actually have a great team because the guys who are doing the film prints they did the 70mm prints of Dunkirk and The Hateful Eight and pretty much all the Tarantino and Christopher Nolan movies.
Oh, right on.
So it's going to look beautiful. But in terms of premiere, we have I can't really say anything about this yet, just because it's not final, and I don't want to say something I'm not supposed to say.
Mm-hmm.
But we're ideally planning on premiering this in fall, and just after that, we're most likely going to have a very massive amount of screenings, not just at festivals, but also at special events in IMAX theaters. And one of the cool things about this is that we're pretty much using every single format there is. So we're using 70mm IMAX, regular 70mm, 35mm. We're also doing digital IMAX screenings. We're going to do digital laser IMAX, which is the 4K IMAX versions.
Yeah.
We're going to do a digital Dolby Atmos version, and also just a regular digital version that's going to screen in theaters. So we're pretty much using every single format there is, which means there are going to be a lot of different versions and a lot of different screenings. And it's going to be interesting, just because obviously every version is going to be slightly different, not just in terms of audio and in visual terms, but also in terms of aspect ratio. Just because obviously the 70mm IMAX version is the tallest one,
Mm-hmm.
because it actually has a very tall very tall aspect ratio. It's 1.43 by 1, which we talked about, which is basically it's very close to the old 4 by 3 aspect ratio. But what they're doing with that is basically it sounds strange in concept, but what they're doing is they're moving you closer to the screen, and those screens are extremely wide, but they're also extremely tall.
Mm-hmm.
So you're sort of in the center of the screen, and it's very immersive, especially with the IMAX sound systems, which have very, very deep low frequencies, and they have a very high frequency range, which is amazing. And they have it's actually just 6 speakers. It's a 6-track system, but those it's just a very immersive and beautiful experience. And yeah, obviously digital IMAX is a little different, just because most of them are in that aspect ratio. But it's still going to be interesting, simply because especially the laser IMAX, which is 4K, because those are I've never actually seen a 4K screening, I think, but they're still supposed to look way better than regular digital screenings. And obviously Atmos is going to be cool, just because it's basically 12 by 1. And I've heard the Atmos mix in a theater, and it sounds incredible. It's basically there's a lot of demonic voices and whispering in the movie, and it just like plays around your head and swooshes over you. That's going to be interesting. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of different screenings, and not just at festivals, but also in just at special events. And our producer, who's working at Warner Brothers, is currently in the process of securing us a bunch of Warner Brothers screenings, which is awesome. So there's going to be a lot of screenings, and I don't think anyone will have to miss this, because we're pretty much going to screen anywhere. But obviously, yeah, the true way for me of seeing this is still either 70mm or 70mm IMAX, which obviously won't be available everywhere, but we're going to do our best to screen this at many places as possible. So yeah, technically the screenings should start by fall, so around August or September.
Awesome, man. Until a screening comes to your area, what's the best place for people to keep in contact and track this thing to see when it will be around them?
We have a Facebook page where we're definitely going to go post updates all the time, which is just Daughter of Dismay. You can just look it up on Facebook. And also, we have a website, and we post updates there, and you can actually subscribe to the updates. And I promise you won't be spammed because we don't post that often. It's just updates whenever there are updates. And it's the website is sodomchimera.com. Yeah, those two are the best ways to keep up to date. We're definitely going to update anytime there is an update. And all the screenings will be listed on the website too. Once we start talking to IMAX personally, they'll probably give updates too. So there'll be a massive press blast before the release too. There's no way if people want to keep up to date with this, there's no way they're going to miss it, just because it's going to be very prominent, and it's going to be very present. We have a lot of promising publicity opportunities, so it's probably going to be everywhere.
Well, right on, man. James, again, congratulations. A huge accomplishment for filming it the way that you did. And I very much look forward to checking it out this fall. But thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
So there you go, man. I hope you all go check out Daughter of Dismay. It is a very promising sounding film, and it sounds like it's going to be everywhere this fall. So it would be hard to not have an opportunity to check this thing out. Next week, like I said, the host of Sinister Creature Con, and I hope at least Tim or Brian, one of the promoters of Sinister Creature Con, if not both of them, will be on the following week. And then it's summertime. Next week as well, we will have a look at Dark Phoenix for Nerdigeddon, and we may actually do 2 Nerdigeddon shows next week. I don't know. We'll see. Dark Phoenix comes out in 2 weeks, so we may push that show back in order to bring the audio of the opening of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Here's the thing, I'm trying very hard to not watch any Galaxy's Edge footage until I go. I'm going on the 8th of June is when I have my reservation with my wife. I am hoping to experience everything. We're going in July for a birthday as well, so we kind of concluded together that we would rather wait in this before they kind of open the floodgates and it's no longer a reservation system in July. We would rather get up early in July to do the ride, the Millennium Falcon ride, than be waiting in long lines and stuff to do the other, the restaurant or what have you, walk around, see things, get a blue milk. So that's kind of what we're going to try to do when we go on the 8th, but we'll have a full review of our experience afterwards. So that being said, I don't know if pulling the audio from the grand opening is going to show a whole lot of the land. If it does, I'm just going to not even... I won't watch it, but I may get the audio of it and make a show out of that. So I won't have a whole lot to talk about to accompany that. And if that doesn't work, which it completely may not until the following week, we'll go with the Dark Phoenix next week. Or later on this week. for Nerdageddon, which will probably be the case now that I'm thinking about it, because the land opens on Friday or Thursday night. So count on the Dark Phoenix cast in a Nerdageddon show, and then of course Campfire Chronicles, and we will also be doing some Hauntcore history. That long-awaited show is finally going to start up and become a accompanying show throughout the summer into the fall. That won't be every week. I think this will be, we'll have, maybe every other week, couple shows here, couple shows there. There may be a period where it's every week. I don't know. Periodically throughout the summer is when that will be going up. And that's more focusing on California haunts. Six Flags, Knott's Berry Farm, and Halloween Horror Nights Universal, and our experiences at those events, because those are the ones that we have attended the most. Anyway, man, thank you for listening. Episode 186. We're closing in on episode 200, which will be a celebration. We're also around the corner from 5-year celebration, which both will be awesome. So stay tuned this week for a whole lot more content. Thank you for listening. Happy Memorial Day. Thank you to everybody who has served and paid the ultimate price so we can do shows like this. Wouldn't be possible at all without our service members in the greatest country on the planet, the United States. So happy Memorial Day, and have a horrific week, everybody.